So we're in the town of Puno on the shores of Lake Titicaca in Peru, and the plan is to ride back to Juliaca, then more or less southwest down to Arequipa. We travelled over 312 kilometres in around about 7 hours, and we did see a lot of interesting things along the way. Ironically, we were staying in the Hotel Arequipa in Puno, but now we're heading for the town of Arequipa. So here we are winding our way uphill over the bluff that overlooks Puno and Lake Titicaca. First stop, the Grifo Montesinos. Grifo means like gas station in Peruvian Spanish. We filled up with 90-octane Gasahol. Since 2011, Peru has had ethanol added to its gasoline. It's only about 7 or 8%. In some places like Brazil, it's up to 27%. Angelo said always fill up with the highest octane, and I'm not a mechanic, but I thought that was a bit odd because to me high octane goes with high compression, and due to the high altitude, I imagine our compression would be a bit less, but there was no problems in the end. The engine ran like a dream. I estimated with 723 kilometres on the odometer, Atwakey should click over her first 1,000 kilometres today, which means time for an oil change and the engine will be officially broken in. Hey, how about this quaint football stadium gateway? As we had to pass through Juliaca, I asked Angelo if we could stop and take a panorama at a roadside junk stall right next to the city's airport runway. He shook his head in disapproval and cautioned me just to use my pocket camera, not my DSLR. So I shot this quickie handheld panorama. Note the loudspeaker mounted on that cargo truck, I guess to announce a scrap metal merchant is passing by. Note Angelo's mismatched mirrors and the rather striking facade to this Catholic church. Angelo pointed out this rock that looks a lot like a kneeling sheep, but even stranger rock formations lay ahead. Then we saw this, a roadside shrine unlike any other I'd seen before. Normally they're in the form of a crucifix or a small little house. This one had a small statuette, offerings of fresh fruit, and what looked like 2 ceramic bowls. Now we're coming to the highest point of the day's ride, Crucero Alto. Unlike other passes, this was sort of on a high plain. At 4,528 metres, that's over 4,855 feet in altitude. On the right, I could just make out a few buildings. One looked like a chapel. There was a railway platform there, and that was actually Crucero Alto railway station. Would you believe there is a connection between this desolate high altiplano railway station and the famous tourist spot of Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco? This unlikely connection is in the form of Henry Meiggs, a robber baron, who after building Fisherman's Wharf absconded from the city of San Francisco, leaving behind business debts of over $1 million. Arriving in Chile by sailing ship, he found some success building railways there before turning his attention to Peru, where he gained railway construction contracts by bribing the president and politicians 10% cut of each project. That eventually bankrupted Peru, but he did build hundreds of miles of railway tracks in the Peruvian Andes, including the Southern Railway, which reaches from the Pacific coast all the way up to beyond Cusco to the town of Aguascalientes at the foot of Machu Picchu ruins. That railway runs parallel to the road route that me and Angelo have been following on our motorbikes so far. Meiggs was so powerful he virtually ruled Peru, and he was even able to print his own banknotes. He used indentured labour, including Chinese coolies, and photos like this survive, illustrating the terrible punishments indentured labour received in the mid-1800s. The tracks, the locomotives, even the sleeper tyres were all imported from the USA or England. He himself wasn't an engineer, but he employed 2 brilliant Polish engineers, Malinowski and Habich, and he was a philanthropist in the early days of archaeology. He sponsored the French archaeologist Theodore Burr to document the ruins of Tiwanaku, which actually has its own railway station, though even that had a destructive twist in the end. Sadly, much of the ancient stonemasonry was plundered to make ballast for the railways or a source of building stone for other construction projects. The next stop was some very weird rock formations. And of course Angelo, being a motocross nut, he wanted to ride up there in what looked to be very steep, sandy and a little bit dangerous terrain. But he took to it like a duck to water, even though coming down looked a bit harder than going up. Those rock formations, I just can't get over them, they're so weird. Now where's he going to come out now? There's no chance of me trying to do that for two reasons. One, I don't have enough experience, and two, my bike is so overloaded compared to Angelo's. Well, anyway, time to get back on the road. The sealed road, that is. A few more miles and we came to Pampa Cañahuas, where there's supposed to be gasoline. Unfortunately, there was no gasoline for sale, so we just had a quick hot coffee and a couple of biscuits. When I asked Angelo, will we have enough gasoline, he said, we should be okay, less than confidently. We're at over 4,000 metres here, but it was mainly all downhill from this point on. It's freezing up there. It was windy, and you see those mountains behind Angelo there. There's snow and there's a lot of fog there. More about that in a minute. But today I was cheating a little bit. I was trying out a heated jacket that I'd bought from Australia. And it worked quite well, but only my torso was warmed by it. But what was really cold were my hands. And I asked Angelo, what can we do about that? And he gave me this little tip.
Hey, estamos en Pampa Cañahuas. Él me pregunta, ¿qué hago si mis guantes se mojan? Te pones estos que son de cirugía adentro, encima estos de acá.
Not long after that we ran into very thick fog. So thick we could hardly see like a couple of metres in front of ourselves. It was probably the thickest fog I've ever seen in my life. Angelo put on his indicator, just flashing, and I could barely see that even though he was only 2 or 3 metres ahead of me. We were down to like first and second gear just to be cautious. I had to lift my visor and pull my glasses off because they were just fogging up so much with the droplets of, mist. Several times we could hear a truck and we didn't see it until it was like almost on top of us, and we just prayed that it didn't stray into the lane, and we kept to the curb. In hindsight, it was probably one of the most dangerous bits of riding I did in 8 years of riding. We should have turned back, but we didn't know how much further it was till the fog lifted, and we thought, well, we may as well just keep pushing through and going through. It seemed like maybe hours. It wasn't hours, it was probably 20 minutes or so, but it seemed like it was an eternity to just getting through that fog, and I was so happy when it finally lifted. It was during this foggy stretch that Atwakey turned over her first 1,000 kilometres, so I did stop and take a photo of that. We were now descending past extinct volcanoes into the valley where Arequipa is. Pretty soon we were in the outer suburbs and heading towards the centre of town. Angelo knew exactly where to go, and we pulled up right in front of the Hospedaje Sumay Wasi, which means honourable or good house. The street was nondescript, but it was only 2 blocks from the main plaza, and the street signs had this really rustic, funky looking font. Fortunately, the rundown state of the cars parked in this street were not indicative of the condition of the Hospedaje Sumay Wasi. The good thing about a motorbike is you can park it indoors a lot of the time if you can get it through the doorway, but my bike was pretty overloaded. Somehow Angelo managed to manoeuvre it in between all the pot plants and everything, and we parked it right outside our room in the hallway there. This building was solidly built. Look at that vaulted ceiling there. You can see I've plugged my laptop in there, and it was then that I discovered that my remote wasn't working, so none of my action cam footage got recorded. The hotel restaurant was called Colibri, which means hummingbird. Choices for the main dish included brochetta de alpaca or cuy chactado, which is guinea pig fried under a hot flat stone. But Angelo took me to a place close by that was a bit more interesting than the hummingbird restaurant. It was the Che Guevara Pizza, Pasta and Parrilla restaurant. And of course they also sold Cuba Libres. Well, as far as I know, Che Guevara went to Cusco twice, but he never came to Arequipa. He never went to Australia either, although he once dreamed of doing it, and he wrote about it in a letter to his father mailed from Mexico City in 1955.
The agencia Latina has promised me a trip to Melbourne for next year, something that I have totally forgotten, since they are not paying me, but I like the idea and I would have loved to have seen some kangaroos.
That plan never eventuated, but how different history might have been if that had happened.
¿Cómo estás, Compañero? Hasta la victoria siempre.
Actually, we had reason to celebrate. Because we lost a day on day 2, that means Angelo, who has to ride back, has lost 2 days, so he's decided he's going to go back to Cusco tomorrow and leave me all on my own to make my way to the Chilean border. Coming up in the next episode...
Tienes que tener mucho cuidado en esta ruta que vas a seguir.
Although I couldn't stop thinking about that accident, it was great to be on the open road. Oh man, the wind was really strong. My room had a great view of Moquegua.
Gringo Loco asks,
hit the subscribe button.
please subscribe.